Hello, Jonas. Good morning. How are you?
Hello.
Good morning.
Hello, Stefano.
Give it a couple of minutes. HPE, EMI. I think we have quorum, right?
I believe so. Anybody from Intel yet?
Nobody from Intel. So I'm thinking who's taking notes. Let's see, I can perhaps do that. Right. To see that. All right. So I put some stuff on the agenda. I think we wanted to conclude about the logo, right? Can we do that? Did we say that? I mean, we have a clear winner here. Concept 4. Let's see if I can share perhaps. Share screen. Desktop. Can you see this?
Yes.
Jonas,
Yeah, I don't know who has voted though. I mean, is that a concern? Or are we ready to conclude that concept 4 is a winner? Any thoughts?
You can go with concept 4. That's my position.
Yeah.
Especially when we had that theme, right? You had that whale-like theme that you want to go with for ODIM. So aligns with that.
Yeah. So is that a vote then? I mean, from AMI, you think that we should go with concept 4
Yes,
in
Joe.
the interest of the democracy process here? Okay, and how about Theatre every?
Yes, both of us voted for 4, so we are fine with that.
Oh, okay. And then we have HPE. Who else? Okay, Stefano.
Yeah, 4 is okay.
Yes, we are good. Good. Stop share. So then I had a couple of other things. Let me first. That's the problem. Taking notes and talking at the same time. We concluded on concept 4. Okay. So we have some proposals, and I don't know how we deal with those. I have put. I can share here again. Actually, I should put links to them. Don't know why I didn't do that. Share. Okay. So we have a proposal for the update service and plugin for unmanaged racks. The update service is basically the regular Redfish update service, which does update firmware. And the only thing we're proposing to implement is the simple update action. That is the one that most vendors support. And so we are proposing that we create a Git issue about the update service, and then we start making contributions to that. And anybody who wants to help out are welcome, of course. So that's, and I guess I did put some stuff on the here, proposals for review. You have the update service. It's very minimal because it already has a spec. So I'm basically referring to it and mentioning that so we will stand up Redfish APIs, of course, and we will use the simple update action as being supported. So that's all on that. Then we are proposing something called an unmanaged. There are unmanaged racks, right? You know that there are some managed racks out there. They have resource managers, like some OCP racks and stuff. And obviously they have resources that they manage. And there are things in a rack. In Redfish, a rack is modeled like a chassis, but with chassis type rack. And obviously, if you are a rack, then you contain things. So there perhaps you contain switches and servers and what have you. So there is a contains list of links that will point to those whatever you contain. And also, if you are a server or a switch or something, your chassis will be having a link that is under contained by. So by doing this, you can then basically figure out where a certain server is. And because you also have a location object under the server or on the chassis, you can figure out in what row it is and you know, the GPS locations and all that. But in order to do this with unmanaged racks, you have to have some sort of an emulator that say, hey, I'm a rack manager for these racks. So that's what the unmanaged rack plugin would do. So you will basically use it to add those unmanaged racks. So if it could be an unmanaged rack from any type of vendor then. And if we click on this, you will see that there's quite a bit of description here and use cases around it. So I don't think we're ready to take a decision on this, but perhaps at least you can look at it, and then perhaps next week we can decide if this is something that we want to do. But I think it's easy enough though for the update service. I guess it's just a Redfish service. There will be others like telemetry and other services. So this is what we want to contribute so that we have some sort of a firmware story in ODIM as well, basically. Any thoughts on that? Any questions on this one? Because
I'm sorry, Jonas. I joined a little bit late. I apologize.
Oh, there you are.
I'm here.
Yeah.
I don't have any heartburn over the update service. I think it's a good idea to do. I need to get I need to get Raffle to attend these meetings as well, so we can start talking about contributions from our side. But the other one, the plugin for unmanaged racks. There's a rack manager that we open sourced in the OCP, I believe. How would this would emulate that, or what you're proposing, as I understood it, and again, I joined while you were talking. So
Yeah.
is a generic sort of emulator for a rack manager.
Yeah, it's I would say.
I understand the value of it. I think it's absolutely important to have that. In fact, I was going to ask also a follow-up question, but let's deal with this first. So if we build a simulator, then what would be the interfaces exposed by it?
Yeah, so you obviously, to add a rack, what you would do is that you would basically do a post to Redfish V1 chassis, right?
Yes.
But then when you add a server into a rack, you obviously will have to set up the links then contains and then from the server contained by, and the server also has a chassis, obviously. And these things we are proposing, I guess the jury is out on how we store these things. It's easy enough to store in the existing database, but you can also have configuration files and things. But if you look at this, Alex, together with Rafael, and then you think that perhaps we can use some other already existing rack manager, we are all ears, right? No issues. But I think by the end of the day, we need this.
Yeah, what I was thinking is that in essence, we can standardize through Redfish the interface for what a generic rack manager would do, and then adjust the implementations. Well, we already put one into open source, so if it's the interface is significantly different from that, then we could adjust that. But in general, this would be a good way of implementing an interface abstraction for any rack manager. And I guess I'm kind of curious what the AMI guys would say. Because it's also, rack managers are also part of the composition kind of space. And then, so if I understood what you just said, just to kind of finish my thought, my train of thought, if I compose the node, I would also want to be able to insert it into quote unquote a rack, right?
Yeah, I think you would add the server to the aggregation by using, and that's another thing I need to talk to you about. But normally you would do a post to an aggregation source in the aggregation service, and then you will get the new server there. And the server obviously will have a computer system, and it will have a chassis and these type of stuff. And then you would stick it to the rack by inserting it there, by basically creating a link from that rack contains and point to that computer system chassis. And then in that computer system chassis, you will point the link back contained by, and now you can go in traverse in both directions, right?
Yes, and that's the key, right? So to me, it would be good to have some symmetry between how we deal with sort of traditional servers in the rack and the chassis and that hierarchy, and how the composed server and how we deal with composed servers, right? The act of composition, the act of composition to me is somewhat separate from the actual act of creating a topology.
Yep. Yeah.
So, sorry, this is Thomas from Ericsson. I think you're making it a little bit too simplistic if you're saying that you should try to model a composed server from a physical world. I mean, as soon as you get, for instance, a server that is based upon a physical chassis with a CPU, potentially a NIC going over NVMe over fabric to a drive that is in some shape and form inserted through the act of composition, it should not necessarily have to sit in the same physical rack.
But what you're saying, Thomas, what you were saying would apply to traditional servers as well. So, I mean, we should not presume that a traditional kind of just a generic sort of server would be implemented or deployed just as a single box. It could be, you know, deployed over multiple trays connected with CLX or something like that.
Yeah.
And
so I mean, basically, I think that anything that is composed should not have a tie at all to a rack manager, because the rack manager is an institution for the one owning the physical bits and bobs that makes up composed things.
How do you then identify a location? Let's say
why do you want to identify a location?
Well, there's several use cases. One is failure, right? So
yeah, but you have to deal with who are you in this case.
Well, so let's take a simple use case: predictive memory analysis. Let's say we have a server. Let's say we have some algorithms running on that server that are looking at memory failure prediction. And then let's say that something we've detected an anomaly that would lead to one. And now what we're trying to do is potentially generate an alarm or an event that basically says this server is gonna explode in the next 15 minutes. And so now how do I say what this server is in terms of a location?
I don't contest that the bits and bobs, the memory that is about to fail, needs to have a location, but it does not have to be exposed up to the host operating system using that server.
Yeah, I agree. I think the composition case is something that is important, but I kind of agree here with Thomas that I don't think it necessarily ties into where something is located. Obviously, if you want to make sure, so one use case here to use this is that you can basically use the northbound APIs and pull out a complete data center picture, all the aisles, all the racks, where a server sits, and also because now you know the switch and the server is both contained in the same rack, and you can pull out the network topology as well. And paint some nice graphical thing. That's really.
Well, my hope is that eventually we get to a model where we can model an entire data center in terms of all the typical, you know, sort of topologies, right? Data halls, compute halls, rows, racks, and.
What I'm saying is that I don't think that we should make it visible for the one that are using the composed servers to know physically.
Oh, no, I agree with you.
But and by that, they should not have to be able to, or should not even be capable of finding out in which computer.
Well, but it's
that should be hidden by the one actually physically owning that topology.
Yeah, but there's a use case where you want to potentially evacuate your workloads, right? And if you don't have it,
but what you're talking about, evacuation and so on and so forth, has to do with availability zones. And availability zones is more the, I mean, you have a zone in Redfish that can model those kind of things, which is not tied to whatever physical rack manager that you happen to have.
But you still want to be able to fix it either with
no, not as a host operating system.
No. So let's tease that apart. So first, I agree with you. The operating system, like what could it possibly do with that? Nothing, right? Because it's running on a node about to fail. So the only thing that should know about this is the orchestration system, right?
Yes.
A resource orchestrator. And
Yep.
so from that perspective, you're absolutely right. You know, the operating system is just, you know, it's held hostage on that device. There's nothing it can do. But the orchestration system can start initiating failovers of the service or migrations of the service and the data. It could, you know, at least attempt to save everybody, right? So from that perspective, we want to be able to identify exactly where the server is. Not so much initially, because the workload needs to be migrated. Clearly, it doesn't matter, right? Clearly, you can just basically raise an alarm and say the server is going to be faulty in a few minutes, or at this point in time, and do a predictive analysis or whatever, and then move the workload. But then afterwards, right, when you actually have to come into a data center and harvest equipment.
But that's not the orchestrator who does that normally. That would be a fault
Well, but
management type of thing.
the orchestrator could potentially initiate an incident management workflow that would actually entail somebody coming in with a replacement part, putting it in, and then completing the loop. So
it can trigger such a thing.
yes,
But it should not be the orchestrator of how you're doing the workflow for the repair flow.
I'm with you. I'm not being very precise with my language. It's 7 a.m. or 8. So my point is that you're right. It could trigger a workflow, but the information that would need to be passed is not going to be something in the availability zone X. There would have to be the best way to be able to do it, the most expedient way, whether it's robotic process automation or a human process automation. It's all about being able to locate that server in the traditional way. If somebody would tell me, hey, go replace a server, I would ask what row, what hall, which rack, which position in the rack.
But you are right in the sense that somebody needs to do the real replacement or work, but that is not the work for the orchestrator. The orchestrator needs to deal with availability for the service it's providing.
Yes, I agree with you. I'm not debating that point. I'm simply saying that the sort of information the sort of topology that would yield a specific location for a server in a traditional kind of rack management case, the unmanaged rack case, is what we would want to have also from a managed rack perspective.
So
we want to make things similar, I think, rather than different. Again, from the automation sake point of view, right? It's a lot easier to detect. If you start detecting, for example, that a bunch of servers are failing in a particular rack, that could point to a power problem or a cooling problem, and you can start doing inference, and you can start trying to figure out what's going on with that rack and start running diagnostics. Send a little robot in there to measure the temperature, right? This is, by the way, that little robot already exists, right? It runs in a lot of data centers. And so that's the kind of zero touch kind of automation that I want to be able to enable with this eventually.
Yeah, but I think we can agree then that something like this is needed, even though the use cases might be, might be some different opinions around. I kind of agree with the fact that it's useful, to know in some cases, perhaps not as much as composition, but if you want to replace stuff and things of that nature. But I think it's also
totally agree on that. I mean, where the location of each and every little physical resource is, that's absolutely useful.
I'll give you another example, right? If the redfish model will be the de facto model for how we create a data center topology, right? Or an enterprise topology, because you could have multiple locations as well. But if that's what we do, then think about the integration with something like ONAP that does placement based on geographic location, the GPS coordinates, or other attributes of a server, and that's how the optimization framework determines where to put a VNF. And if we can share this information in a consistent way with an orchestrator like ONAP, I think that would be a good thing, right? So that they wouldn't have to deal with composed infrastructure one way and a traditional infrastructure another way.
I think you bring up an example where existing code might be useful, but the data model of doing orchestration based on physical geoposition, I think is flawed. It ought to be what kind of a bandwidth services you have in between the different nodes. But that's another thing.
Yeah, I'm not saying the model is perfect. All I'm bringing up is a set of use cases that should guide us in terms of what we do from the interface perspective.
And I think that we can stay with what Jonas said. The service to be able to have unmanaged rack, also given a lot of data about what it is useful in some context. But I would not like to put it together into it's useful for composition, because then I think we destroy the composition model. Then we're exposing too much.
Yeah, and that's what I said before. To me, the act of composition is different from the act of managing something that's been composed. And how you manage something once it's been composed, a compute resource that's been composed. Ideally, the way you would deal with that resource would be as consistent as possible with just a box, right? And I understand that, in terms of the actual piece parts, it could be spread across multiple trays or multiple racks or whatever, but in terms of physical sort of topology, but logically, we still need to be able to say, here is a bunch of servers that we just composed, and they need to be managed in the same way in terms of availability, in terms of configuration, in terms of change, updates, everything else. That's basically it.
Sure.
But do we agree that this one is a little bit bigger? So perhaps we take a week to read through this, and if you find something that already exists and is doing a lot of this, we can definitely look at using something like that, right?
Yeah, let's do that. And I think it would be good. I'm going to start getting John Leong to attend this as well, because they've all these guys, like when they find out that the meeting is really early in the morning, everyone runs. But I think they have him here too, since he's the composition king. So.
Yeah, he's a good guy. I mean, he has a lot of viewpoints, so that's always good. So let's get him involved. But for the update service, I was wondering if we could vote on that, because first out, it's something that we can work together. Anybody that wants to, contribute. But it's already an accepted Redfish specification service, so I think it's an easy thing to agree.
If what you're implementing is what's there, then I'm in favor of it, right? I think eventually I'll just make a caveat here. The caveat is that once we start looking at Redfish APIs, and we need to define some overarching use cases in terms of how we see this heterogeneous, infrastructure management plane sort of evolving. There may be some additions or modifications to what Redfish provides that we would need to make. Simply to support less vendor extensions and more profile type alignment. So from that perspective, some interfaces may change, but I don't think this one would. At least
I don't think, and I think what we need to do is, if interfaces are changing, or if we feel that they need to change, then we need to go and work with DMTF and not just change them on our own, is my thinking. Because I don't want to see a special version of the update service in ODIM that has extra APIs that the update service in Redfish does not have.
But we would sync, right? We would always do standards first and then change the implementation to match, right? That's kind of what we've proposed in general, right? We as a community, I think, could potentially make those changes quicker in DMTF if we rationalize them.
One question I have. So the unmanaged rack, are we planning to formalize it and take it to any specific standards body?
No, it's just all the resources already exist in Redfish. We're talking about chassis and under there, and the links exist and the location objects exist. So everything exists. It's just that because we don't have a lot of vendors have unmanaged rack, we don't have any resource managers on them. So we need somebody to own it. So that's what we're suggesting. We put that in a type of a plugin, right?
Okay. So when you say unmanaged rack, we are trying to create a logical rack, kind of, is my understanding.
We're trying to create the impression that you have a rack manager.
Rack manager, okay.
Well, but and that rack manager is simply a point of aggregation, nothing else, right?
Very true, very true.
Especially for power and thermal calculations.
So I wonder if there's already a notion of a rack in Redfish, right?
Right.
It's a chassis, and it has a chassis type, and the chassis type will be rack in that
It
case.
is. Right.
Okay, so if we use what's there today, an alternative way to do it would be to say that a chassis, from a modeling perspective, um, from a modeling perspective, we could simply say that, you know, a chassis has an optional manager, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's managed by it, that property is called.
Well, but it's optional, meaning that I can, if I have it, then I know that I should be talking to the rack manager to further introspect into the rack. But if, or maybe it's a notion of a hierarchy somehow that we can express as part of the chassis type. But, or maybe it should say managed, right? It probably does already. I forgot.
So in the chassis of chassis type rack, there is a managed by property that we would link to the manager that will exist just because we have this rack manager then, right?
Okay, and then other than just a point of aggregation, which already exists in terms of a rack itself, what would then I would have the question of why create an artificial point of aggregation if it doesn't really exist?
Exactly.
Because no, somebody needs to own those resources, and it has to be a resource manager, right?
Well, no, a resource manager has the ability to act on a bunch of resources in a delegated way. That's in essence what I think the idea is, that if I have an intelligent rack manager, the expectation is that you would delegate actions to it, not go around it. And
What
so
actions are you talking about?
if you're trying to act on the elements under its control, you shouldn't be doing that out of band. You should be doing that.
Yeah, no, you still are capable of doing a reset by talking to the compute system. The compute system has a reset action, and you will obviously be able to hit that directly, right? According to the redfish model.
Well, so, okay, so.
What about
You can hit
this?
the redfish model, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there is something that is resettable behind that.
Right, and that's my point. This is an example of where we need to figure out what we would like it to look like from the upstream automation perspective and repeatable sort of algorithms, right? If I'm traversing my entire data center hierarchy and I'm doing introspection and I'm doing, you know, discovery of what's out there, I would want to have a consistent way of doing that, and I would use the rack or the chassis object to figure out, you know, what I have.
But you would basically hit redfish v1 chassis and you would do a filter where chassis type equals racks, and then if you pull out a rack, you can go into that rack and you can pull out the contains link, and then you will see everything that it contains there.
And then you would have everything you need from an aggregation perspective.
Yeah, but the contains link is owned by the resource manager, and that would be this rack manager for unmanaged racks. Right?
See, maybe there's a change that needs to be made where that contains that particular attribute is part of the is linked to the chassis, not to the rack manager. The rack manager is, in essence, you know, can do advanced functions on what's in the rack.
But if you think about a server today, right? A server has two representations in redfish. It has a computer system, it has a chassis, and there the chassis type is rack mount. And if you then look at that chassis, you will have you will have managed by, and the contains would be simply pointing to nothing, right?
Okay.
So who owns those resources? The BMC or the ILO or whatever is the manager for that server owns those resources, and not ODIM, right? So ODIM will go out there and it will basically look at who's managing you. Yeah, okay, that is the ILO, so that's linked to that manager. Or a BMC. So the problem with an unmanaged rack is that it doesn't have a resource manager. So everything we want to set for that rack is just hanging in the air. So that's why we're proposing that we have this plugin that will be there and emulate being a manager for all those racks, right? A collection of racks, just like you were saying.
One question I would ask, Panos, is what will that rack manager offer, right? Apart from just being a managed by or an aggregating source, what other service can it offer, right, to the end user? Like, will it do any power limiting? Will it do any power sequencing?
Yeah, see, the thing there is we don't have any sensors in an unmanaged rack. We might, but so we can evolve it obviously if we find racks that could you know, detect power draws and these type of things. But usually these type of racks, they would have a rack manager in such case.
I guess the notion of an optional rack manager for the unmanaged rack would fit also for when we get into the area of switch fabrics and so on and so forth, because we will most likely not own the switch devices that has a switch fabric if it is from one of the larger vendors. They might be completely managed by completely different systems and in completely different ways. And they won't write a rack manager just because there is an interest for seeing the physical topology or contained by structure or something like that. They will expose the necessary topologies that ODIM needs to understand. And the physical maintenance of separate physical switches that are intricately built together by some sort of a network operating system in a cluster that we don't know about, we shouldn't try to emulate.
Yeah.
So I think that we should not go too far of trying to structure everything around a rack manager. It's better that we structure things about the information that needs to be had to do the necessary use cases. And if it's about availability zones, then it's for the orchestrator to understand that they can build things with a topology and so on and so forth with a dependency in between components. But if it is about maintainability of repairing faulty stuff, then it's a different use case that might need to know other things going down into physical topology more than logical topology.
Well said. Well said. Yeah. So how about listing the use case for this specific?
Oh, it's on the, so the current use cases are in the proposal that you will find in the under the DSC page.
Okay.
Yeah, but there, I think we can add more. We can drive, and if we approve this, we can have a wiki page for this architecture and you know, work together to drive in more use cases. The use cases that make sense, right?
Yeah. So what we can do is, Jonas, you and your team can add the use cases that you can envision for this specific need, right? And then maybe in our next meeting, we can, before that, if possible, each of us can review, like Thomas and others, Alex and the other team as well. And then see if there is any, we can review each use case and see how it needs to be addressed. Now, is this rack manager essential to address that use case, or is it being addressed in a different way right now, right? And if that justifies a need, then probably there is a strong case.
What I would also maybe try and do is kind of look at it again. If we put our IT hats on, right? There are kind of three topologies in the data center, right? There's the physical topology, a logical topology, and then a management topology. And you can, so in essence, the management topology is what, you know, is the relationships that say manages and managed by.
Right.
But that's orthogonal to the physical containment or the logical containment. And if we look at it that way, then you could argue that maybe there's something missing in the Redfish model that would allow us to have these separations of concerns, right? Because if I need to go do remediation use cases, most likely I eventually would need to kick off a workflow through full automation or through human assisted automation that basically deals with replacement, right? Of some sort, piece parts or the whole server or the whole rack, who knows, right? But I need to be able to do that. Logically, I need to keep track of what I've composed and you know what my logical representation is in terms of containment, in terms of data halls, in terms of, you know, hot, cold rows, things of that. It's a layer, it's an overlay on top of the physical world. And then from a management perspective, only if I need to do actions or reconfigure my telemetry streams or do additional discoveries would I care who manages what and what is managed by whom. And so to me, we need to maybe tease those three things apart and see what's needed in Redfish to support that, because that's how people manage data centers today.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so we can look at that as well, and obviously we can work with DMTF. For instance, in chassis, it contains and contained by were read-only things, but we managed to change that. So I think already in 2020.2, it's now writable. So
Yeah.
they were modeling this to be able to model an enclosure basically, and they knew from the very beginning an enclosure has 16 blades or whatever enclosure you have, right?
Right, because ultimately, even where I'm going with the management topology is that ultimately, as you create this disaggregated management plane for infrastructure, you will need to model it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's also being able to say there's an instance of a physical infrastructure manager running at this location, that location, and it manages some collection of hardware resources. And those resources in turn may have specific managers, and those managers may have other managers. That creates the hierarchy of control that you want to be, and escalation that you want to have, right? And also defines fault domains as well.
Yeah, so the use cases are defined right now very simple. It's basically how to add a rack group, rack, and a server, and how to remove them. So they're very simple, and we can keep adding here, right? But
yeah, we just want to, and I'm not saying we need to boil the ocean up front, right? But we at least need to know directionally. We at least need to directionally kind of know where we're headed so that we can incrementally add to this model. I don't disagree that we need it, just kind of want to put it on the right tracks and then evolve it, right, over time, because we can't do it in one shot anymore.
No, I agree, but so the model is clear, and we need to discuss use cases that might require us to change it, and then we need to take that to DMTF, I think.
Okay.
But as far as, so this we hold off on, but what about the update service? Can we have a vote on that so that it's approved to start working on? In that case, we will create a Git issue for it, and then we can, if somebody else want to join the work, we can create a feature branch in the repo, and we can collaborate there. However you guys want to do it, right?
Okay. Who's chairing the meeting today?
So I guess because Bob didn't show up, and I'm taking notes as well. So
yeah, just so you guys know, Bob will be somewhat scarce in the next couple of weeks. He's taking care of his sick mom. So anyway, so let's post on the chat, what decision we're trying to make, and then we do the usual -1.
Yeah, so okay, so perhaps we need to go back. We actually, the logo concept 4 was approved by vote, but I didn't record that, and I just so let's vote on the update service now then, and let me just write what it is, the proposal. Hold on here.
Just write something really quick in the chat so we have a recording, and we can even, for consistency's sake, also write down the concept for the fish, the sharks.
Okay, so there you go, and then let's vote. So as far as voting, Alex, I guess it's only the TSC members, the companies that have joined that are voting, unfortunately.
That's right, and all we're saying is company name +1, -1, or 0 to abstain.
So I obviously vote 1.
No, that would have been kind of scary if you voted 0 or -1.
Yeah.
I think we're good here.
Okay, so that is approved by vote.
Yeah.
Logged in chat, and then I was thinking we could perhaps vote on the logo as well.
Yeah. That's fine.
And I do think we should follow the, I don't think we should vote for different alternatives now. I think we can conclude that concept 4 has more votes than anything else by far, and the vote will be to follow that poll, basically, right, Alex? Or what do you think?
Well, we're basically ratifying the results of the poll. The poll was
Yeah.
taken, and this is the last ditch attempt for anybody to say we really hate the fish.
Yeah. Of the poll for the. Oh, it doesn't have spell check in the chat window.
No, you got to be careful here.
Yeah, ratify. How do you spell that? R-A-T-I-F-Y, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good. So then, with that out of the way, now we'll take notes here as well. But there was another thing I wanted to talk about, and let me go back to the meetings. We had some agenda here, so I don't miss anything. Yeah, so in the CI/CD today, I think you all know that we were using Docker, and there was a suggestion from, I forgot how it was it Sebastian? Perhaps, that we move to Kubernetes instead. So that's something I also wanted to propose.
Which runtime are you going to use?
Runtime?
Okay, so you just want to use Kubernetes end to end.
Yeah, just a single node Kubernetes instead of using Docker. It just makes our life easier, because when we are commercializing the product, we are going to offer Kubernetes anyhow. So it makes, otherwise we have to maintain two things, which is, and so if everybody wants to go in that direction, I think it makes a lot of sense.
I would second that. I would say that at least initially Kubernetes would be a better way to go forward.
Yeah.
A question not to, in any shape and form, push it in one or the other direction from there. This is more my ignorance of the case, but what kind of scaling are you shooting for? And I'm not talking about upward scalability, because upward scalability is everything what everybody else talks about. How low can you scale down, or should you be capable of scaling down? I think that's an important issue. To be able to scale down to one single instance of something for those type of nodes where you really cannot have a cluster of 3 or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's important. And to be honest, I would love to see ODIM to be able to be embedded, right, in some device. And the big problem I see there today is the message bus being implemented in Kafka being Java based, demanding like 3 nodes and all of these things. So I think we need to have an abstraction above the message bus and to be able to switch that out with something that is much lighter, so we can hit those.
Completely agree with you. This is actually, that's something I think we suggested as well from the Intel side.
Yeah. And then scaling up, I think, is another problem, but that's, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm with you with that, as long as you can scale down to one in some shape and form, but always think about being able to scale down to one. And I'm pretty happy with that. I mean, scaling up you can do in multiple different ways, but if you start thinking about that your minimum entity to be able to run something like ODIM is 3, and then because it's handling hardware, it needs to start before everything else. So it needs to be 3 physically separated things that doesn't run on top of anything else that have yet not started. Then you're in trouble.
I think what, Thomas, what you bring up is actually, if we were to kind of up-level this a little bit, what you're bringing up is an important point. I think we need to kind of start maybe agreeing on the basic or the minimal system qualities or ODIM, sort of systemic qualities in terms of size, footprint, where it needs to be able to operate. So we at least agree on what the minimum deployment would look like. And then all architectural changes or all changes going forward would at least be guided by that, right? Because we haven't really written this down anywhere. We kind of all agree that this is the right thing, but from a community perspective, if others join, we just want that information to be available to them as well. So maybe it's worth writing down on the wiki what we believe the minimum deployment of ODIM should look like, including the requirement for it to be potentially embeddable.
Yeah, no, I agree. But so we're running a little bit out of time. Sorry for being a little bit pushy, but I'm going to enter a vote to move to Kubernetes for CI/CD. So if we are okay with voting with that one. A lot of voting today. There is one more important thing I need to bring up with you guys before you. Pietro, so are you guys Daniel?
I don't really. I'm okay. I'm okay with Kubernetes, but I think I don't have a real strong view of either. So.
But your name is Daniel. I guess you're Swedish.
Yes, I'm Swedish.
Okay,
yes.
Cool. Yeah, just like me, Jonas. But okay, cool. Good. There is another thing, and that is a situation that I hope we will not be in the future. But because we were kind of starting working on the aggregation service in parallel with socializing it inside the MTF, and Intel's John Leung was helping us out, working with it on his side as well. What is today in the code, how you add a service, you're using an action, but what actually came out of the MTF when everything was ratified after the pull request was debated to the ends of extent was posting to a collection of aggregation sources instead of using an action. So there is a delta from how the aggregation service look like to what it is in the code. So we want to start immediately or as soon as possible to now when the Redfish spec has been released with the aggregation service to align it so that we are spec compliant.
Do you think that what you did was a better way forward than what they did in the spec, or do you guys feel that I need to
Alex, I have viewpoints, perhaps over a beer sometime. But I mean, there was a process and everybody agreed, and I fully stand behind the Redfish.
All right.
So yeah, I think we just need to go and change it so that it becomes spec compliant. Is that something we need to vote on? Should I just type it in, or I mean?
I don't think we can change what the MTF decided, so I don't know.
Yeah, we are in violation right now, so we just want to fix that problem in the code.
Yeah, so I think it's just a bug fix. So
yeah. Yeah, good point. Good point.
Just a bug fix to align with the spec. So I don't think you want to approve every bug fix to align with the spec.
Absolutely not. I agree. So that was that, and then there is another thing on tasks. So today, you know, when you fire off something that will take a while, and I think we configure it to be more than two seconds, then instead of returning, you will basically get a task back, and then and this is according to the spec, you will monitor that task through a task monitor URI, and when it's finally done, that's when you will get a return, and so on and so forth. And the problem we have in ODIM today is that if we have a reboot or a power goes out and ODIM comes up, it forgets about all its tasks.
Yes.
And that's an issue. What I want to see instead is, or if I know as a client that I had a task running and ODIM goes for reboot, I want to be able to query that task, and perhaps it comes back as failed with an explanation that we don't know what happened, and then at least I know it failed and I can restart it. today it's just gone. And this is
So
the problem.
you want to introduce persistence over reboots or loss of
Not in a way that ODIM will have the intelligence to fire off 14 tasks and know the dependencies between them. But I still want to acknowledge that, yeah, the task existed, and I'm sorry, I don't know what happened because I went for
How
a
do you, this leads to a bigger question of rollback. These are management actions you're executing. So if the power goes out, conceivably you will leave some chunk of your physical infrastructure in an unknown state.
Yeah, but I mean, what is implemented today is just whatever. If you ask for something, you will get a task back if it takes too long. For instance, you might make an update to a fabric, and because of that, now whatever fabric manager needs to go out and make changes to a bunch of switches. So you will get a task back, and if that task, then if it's just gone, it doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
So I think we can file a bug for that as well and fix it. But then, Alex, there is a larger story. What do you want to do when you do the update service? Because let's say you want to all of a sudden update the firmware of 15 servers in a certain order, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden there is a problem, and then do you support rollbacks and these type of things?
That's a bigger question, and we do
Yeah.
need to discuss it because, especially in a distributed environment, that could get you into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I agree. All right, sorry for taking some time on that. Is there anything else today? Because we are 3 minutes left.
I think we're probably done for now, given that we only have 2 minutes left.
Yeah. Anything on any more companies that you guys have run across that you feel could be involved? We actually had a presentation for CNT today, as you might have seen, Alex. There was some.
Yeah, so I'm kind of trying to recruit two companies to join in, right?
Let it be a server vendor. Let it be.
Well, so server vendors are in the hands of Bob and Chris, and I need to check with them what they're doing there. I've had several discussions with Canonical, and they believe that there may be some good value for them to join in on the fun as well.
Huh.
And also a company in Finland called Viavi, is also interested in joining potentially. So they want to have an exploratory meeting, and Jonas, I might have to bring you into that as well. Viavi's been involved pretty actively in different zero-touch management and infrastructure management standards, and also in open source. So they bring a very different perspective on how things need to be, more from a debugging and sort of other kinds of perspectives, security as well.
Oh, I see. No, that's interesting.
So yeah, so we'll see. The other thing is I kind of started working on the operator side of the house, and so I'm in the process of scheduling meetings with T-Mobile, Sprint, Deutsche Telekom, and Verizon.
Oh, nice. Okay, and I guess I reached out to Jeff Hilland, and he also wants to schedule something for us to go in front of the MTF and see if we can, give an overview of where ODIM is.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to John Leong today also, just to kind of get him up to speed on what we've been doing. So.
Okay, guys, I will do the minutes, but I will do them tomorrow morning. I'm in Europe right now, so it's late here, and I need to go out and have dinner and stuff.
Got it. You brave person, you flew.
Yeah, I know. I had the mask on for 22 hours. That is
God.
Horrible. Yeah.
All right.
All right, guys. Talk to you guys later.
Bye.
Thanks.
Stay safe.
Sure. Bye-bye.